Hello, folks. We've come to that time of year in the church year when we talk about stewardship. Oh boy. Stewardship, you know what that is? It's usually just code word for, oh, here comes a bunch of sermons or a bunch of thoughts about money, and you're just going to ask us for money, and we're all going to be uncomfortable. Friends, the committees that ask for money are uncomfortable doing it. It's not particularly their greatest joy in life, and you don't like getting asked either because who does? Who likes getting asked for money? Especially if you're not like walking home with a new television or something. It's not kind of a clear exchange or transaction of the kind you might have in the store. But we're going to be talking about stewardship in four different movements. Each of the movements will divide into two parts, and those two parts will each start with the letter R. So for this time, we're talking about remembering our money stories and rejoicing in our story. So stewardship always begins for us in the church, for us, God's people. Stewardship always begins with God, with God's providing. Our stories don't necessarily always start with God providing. If I were to ask you a story about yourself and money, you might start the way I would, which is I would remember, oh yeah, my first job was walking beans in Iowa for $1.25 an hour, up and down the rows of beans with a hoe in my hand, cutting down cockleburs. Well, you had to pull the cockleburs, or cutting down the volunteer corn, or that sort of thing. And then the next year, getting another job for, wow, $3 an hour, doing other kind of work, painting work, preparing for painting. And then I think I worked my way all the way up to $3.50 an hour. What a princely sum over the course of a couple of summers. Well, that's one form of the stories when we think about money stories in our past, what we've done and what we've earned, this job, that job, another job. Another form of money stories is a sort of a societal, a cultural money story. You know, the story of rags to riches. My great grandfather came to this country with 17 cents in his pocket, and he did a bunch of menial jobs, but then he started a business and it was slow and it was hard, and he went out of business a couple times, but then he caught something. He caught a business that really caught the eye of people, and he began to grow and grow, and he was the builder, and then he passed it on to his son or daughter, and they really established it. And then the third generation was a little rocky with it, but my family is all successful because, just think of the luck and the pluck and the determination and the grit that has come down generation to generation. That's a wonderful story, especially for families whose ancestors were allowed to own property, who had access to all of the privilege that money allows, or that their skin color allowed them. Well, anyway, I don't want to get into that, but it is a part of the story. So when we think about money as the people of God, when this gets on our agenda, we kind of leaf back through our own family album and we look at a story. Well, it may not be the very first story, but a story in which God provides, because that's where our stewardship story begins. It always begins with God's provision, with God's work, with God's initiative. So the story of the people having come out of Egypt, having been delivered from Egypt by God, and then they're in the wilderness and they're hungry and they're thirsty, and what's going to happen? Are they going to live? Are they going to die? Who knows? So, as the story goes, the people complain to Moses, why did you bring us out here into the wilderness? We could just as easily have died in Egypt, where at least we would have died, well, with our bellies full. Well, here's an interesting thing about this. No sooner did they say that than God provides. God provides. Okay, I hear you. I'll answer. I'm not going to send this to committee. I'm not going to go through a whole tevye like, well, should I do this or not? If I give you today, will you just ask for more tomorrow? If I give you today, will you waste it all on cigarettes and beer? If I give you today, are you going to become dependent on me? If I give you today, is this going to screw up our... No, no. They ask, God answers. They ask, God answers. Simple as that. God answers promptly. That's what our story tells us. God answers promptly. That's something we remember, and it gives us cause to rejoice. Here's a second aspect of the story, that God answers generously. God answers generously, gives them manna and quail. Did you remember the birds in the story? God gives them manna, this bread-like substance, and quail. And in another story, not this one, God gives them water in the wilderness. So what do they have? Manna, they have carbs. Quail, they have protein. Water, well, hydration or water, right? So they have what they need to survive. Now think about what it would have been like if they had asked God for food and God had said, well, you need food, huh? Let's make a deal, shall we? How about I give you grasshoppers? Food seems awfully generous. Or how about I give you tree bark? Because you guys seem to like to complain a lot. Maybe you need to flap your jaws on something else. Or how about I just give you, well, just a little less than you actually need. Keep you hungry just on purpose. Do you know what it feels like to have asked for something and then to have the only one who can supply you sort of just kind of dicker you down? Just kind of like, yeah, well, I know you say this is what you need, but you probably don't need it, really, do you? If you're the person who's asking, you start to wonder, well, what's going on here? Are you trying to get away with just as little as possible because you don't think much of me, or what's happening? In this story, in this story, God provides generously. God provides generously. This is what we remember. God isn't stingy, but generous. We remember and we rejoice because that's who our God is. And the other part of it is that God gives judiciously. Now, God does give enough, doesn't do this bartering nonsense, but God gives enough, but not too much. The manna and the quail, they're good for a day, but there's no refrigeration in the desert. Good for a day, but they're not good for 2 days. Give us this day our daily bread, we pray. The people don't ever have a chance to grow out of a sense of dependence upon God. They need God. They need God. And so God doesn't give them 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 days worth of bread at a time, only on the day before the Sabbath. Then they get 2 days so that they don't have to work on the Sabbath. See, the crafter of this story isn't just telling us a story about, these people complain, aren't they terrible? No, 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 that's not what it's about. It's not just about Moses and his position as a prophet and priest and whatnot. No, 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 it's not about that. It's not just about what is this stuff we're getting in the wilderness. There are plenty of questions in this story, but the big question that faces us always is, who's God? What kind of God do we serve? And this story helps us to remember God's promptness, God's generosity, and God's judiciousness, that God provides when we ask, that God provides generously what we need, and God provides judiciously, not tons more than we need, because if we get tons more than we need, it's not that the gift is going to spoil, but we could spoil. We could spoil with our overdependence on material things, as if material things made us happy. Social scientists who have studied this have told us again and again and again that once you've supplied for your basic needs, having more wealth does not make you happier. At least there's no necessary relationship between more wealth and more happiness. See, our rejoicing comes from remembering that we have a stable story, a firm story, a solid story on which we base our lives. The story of God's provision, not just our own, see how good we are, or um, see what a whiz bang financial planner I was able to hire, or anything like that. Nope, 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 nope. Our money stories start with the story of God's provision, of God provides. That's a good thing for us to remember as we start this series on stewardship. We remember who God is. We remember and we rejoice. Well, with that, I'll see you next week. We're going to have 2 in a row, and then we're going to have a couple-week break, and then we'll do 2 more as November comes upon us. So, God bless and be well. So long.